Just Branding. The podcast.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of Just Branding. We're really, really thrilled to have Raitis Velps joining us all the way from Latvia today to really discuss brand management. We're looking at the brand management conundrum. Now, we're going to get into that in enormous depth in just a minute. But just before that, who is Raitis? Just to give you a bit of a flavor. Well, on his LinkedIn, he says that he's a dog owner, so anything to do with dogs. He's a Star Wars nerd, and he's an avid reader. So that gives you a bit of a flavor of the personality we're about to interview. But what does he do? How is he qualified to talk to us today? And well, since 2020, he's been serving as the CMO at Corebook, which helps brands and industries, companies in industry really manage brand identity systems. And we're going to be talking about that throughout today. And also, he's a multidisciplinary guest lecturer across the Baltic region, and with really a specialism in marketing, sales, and branding as disciplines. And I guess the final point to say is he's quite a celebrated expert in this area. He's been featured in Creative Boom, Branders Magazine, and many, many others. So welcome to the show, Raitis. It's amazing that you've carved out some time for us. Thank you.
Thank you for that incredible introductions of me. Definitely, if somebody wants to chat about Star Wars or what it means to be a dog owner, hit me up. I have a lot of talk to. Yeah, actually, fun fact, nobody reads Star Wars novels, and I do. So that should tell a lot about my level of nerdness about this. So, but yeah, happy to be here. Happy to chat a little bit more about what it means to be a branding expert and the brand itself in 2024, and how to manage the brand in a nutshell. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm going to probably regret this, but before we get on, I've got an amazing Star Wars joke that I have to just kind of quickly offer to everybody. Okay. It's a bit of a dad joke, so forgive me if you find this a bit embarrassing. Right. So Luke and Obi-Wan, they go out for dinner, and the dinner is served. And you can elaborate on this if you're retelling it. Jacob's like, what the heck is going on? But
Where are we going, Matt?
Luke, the thing is, it comes with chopsticks, and Luke can't use chopsticks. Okay, so he's really trying to eat these intergalactic dumplings, and it's really difficult for him to eat. Right. So Obi-Wan leans over and has this advice for Luke. Okay, you ready for the advice? Use the fork, Luke. Use the fork. That was so bad. Let's move on. We might cut that out.
Yeah, Marco, just cut that one out.
Anyway, let's move on. Let's get into this seriously. This is a serious podcast. We want to talk about brand management. So I guess, first of all, I've given a bit of an introduction about you, but give us a bit more flavor. Like, how did you get involved in brand management, and how did you come to join Corebook, and why is it something that excites you?
It's actually quite a funny story. So
not as funny as Matt's joke, I'm sure.
Definitely not a bad joke there, Buzz. I was actually leading a marketing and branding department in one of the leading healthcare brands here in Baltics, and we started to work on our brand guidelines refresh. And I was starting to look at solutions out there that wouldn't be PDF essentially. And then totally randomly, because it was so early stage, I came across Corebook. Man, I tested it out. I was like, all right, this is such a young company. Not sure if it fits. We're pretty huge. We're pretty big. Definitely not for us. Let's go ahead with the PDF. That was the story that I told myself then. And about a week later, Yanis, who is CEO of Corebook, totally out of the blue, just reached out to me and he's, hey, I love what you do. I love what you talk about. I just checked out your own personal website. Love what I see. Why don't you come and have a conversation with us about joining Corebook? And my first instinct was, hell no, like not in a million years. I'm in a well-established brand. I'm not going to join a early stage startup who has an MVP version of the product, right? And that ended there. Essentially, that ended there. And about 2 weeks go by, and I'm like, I just can't get out of my head this Corebook idea, right? And I sent him a message to LinkedIn, and I'm like, hey, let's have that conversation. And the first time I met them actually was Yanis was in the woods, just walking around. Colleague Maxims was also somewhere else, like just going on and about. And I was like, well, this is super unserious. I can join the startup where like they aren't even at the office or at the computer. They're just like going on about their life and doing the thing and having conversations with me. But after hearing all this, what is their vision, how they see the future of the branding industry, we totally aligned on the issues at hand, right? And I was like, all right, so I'm gonna leave this huge brand and I'm gonna do a Hail Mary with you guys and I'm gonna join. And I was the very first employee they actually hired. So yeah, that's about it.
What got you across the line? What did they say to convince you?
Well, it's such a cliche, but they said that if you see a rocket ship, just jump on it and don't think about it. And if you feel like we are a rocket ship, do it. If not, don't. Like, stay with your brand. You're going to be fine, right? And I was like, what the hell? I'm definitely going to get on that rocket ship. Like, and I think also the fact that by nature, I like to risk a lot. I remember telling to my wife that I'm actually going to join this new startup. And her first response was, are they going to be able to pay you a salary or what's going on?
So how big's the company now? Give us a bit of a flavor of the size and the scale, and then we want to really get into brand management just generally.
Yeah. So we actually are, I like to call it like lean and mean machine, right? So we have just under 10 people in-house, but we work a lot with freelancers and creative agencies to take care of the bulk of the work, for example, for creative, for marketing, for all that, right? So we fully understand the freelance market and industry in itself nowadays is, I think, at the all-time high. Right? It's so many great professionals are actually freelancers now. And you can get their expertise and their experience at a fraction of the cost it would mean to actually get them in-house, right? And also the fact that nobody should be limited to having hire people from their region or like the local region. There's a talent out there across the globe who can do such an incredible job. And yeah, we love to collaborate with them, work with them. And I think that also reflects on our, like, the mission statement itself, right? We've been like remote first since day zero. So we would like to also collaborate with guys across the globe. Yeah.
We haven't actually talked about what it is or what it does just yet. So we're kind of out of context here. Do you want to share a little bit about what Corebook's all about and I guess your role in it as well?
Yeah. So Corebook is essentially online brand guidelines platform where instead of building out a PDF for the brand that will hold all of the guidelines for the brand, instead of doing that, you can just head to the Corebook, build it out. It's totally online environment, just like as you would expect from something like website, right? And it fixes a lot of issues that the legacy formats, I would say, had, right? So the version control, access sharing, privacy, and at the end of the day, multimedia files, PDF just can't hold like animations, audio, videos, none of that stuff, right? And yeah, that's like elevator pitch kind of a thingy.
But there are some of the key problems around brand management these days. So it's solving a big problem there.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sort of the challenges, just generally, you mentioned not a PDF. You mentioned that you can't hold animation and audio, but like from my perspective, like I think there's this I work with a lot of different size companies, particularly bigger companies. There's loads of challenges, particularly when it comes to consistently applying a brand identity system. And I find this particularly with global companies where there's different regions, right? Where you've got different agencies, you've got different teams, even in-house. You've got different partners that also kind of log in and download stuff and start using stuff. And it can be quite difficult to maintain consistency. And of course, if you don't maintain consistency, you damage trust. So that's my take on it. So that's why it's so important. for businesses to think about that. But what are your thoughts, Raitis? How do you see, modern brand management, online brand management systems? What problems do you see them solving for businesses?
I think we have to actually take 2 steps back, right? So not even think about the tools or platforms that we end up using for our brand guidelines and brand in general. I think it's a question about lack of confidence in branding integrity, right? Whenever somebody has to work on branding assets, there is always this overarching question. Is this the latest version? Do I have access to all of the assets? Do I know everything I have to actually do my job efficiently, right? And that, I think, comes down to the lack of unified kind of ecosystem for the brand. So let's take an average brand, right? So their assets live in asset management system. Their brand guidelines live on their laptops in a folder somewhere, some version of it at least, right? You don't know if it's the latest one, but you know that you have at least one file that's named brand guidelines that you should actually use. And then there's a bunch of other platforms that you have to use, right? So for the marketing purposes, for the sales purposes, like all the decks, all the pitches, all of those things, including like brand templates, usually actually live in totally separate environments. And when you have to get actually like down to the work and actually make something happen, you spend a lot of time just looking for the right information, not so much actually doing the work itself. And then if you spend a lot of time actually looking for that, you start to lose like step by step that confidence in what are you going to actually build out at the end of the day. Because you look into one folder, it's not there, you look in another one, then you try to get some form of a context between the guidelines and then the assets and then what is the brief for your project, right? And as time goes on, you just lose that confidence in that branding integrity at the end of the day. And then we come across another whole bunch of things is that when you have like multinational brands where you have brands in like USA, Europe, Asia, Australia, cultures also impact a lot in the branding, right? Something that you would say in Europe, you wouldn't necessarily say in Asian market, right? So again, having that one almost kind of a source of truth and like that unified ecosystem where it doesn't matter who you are or what is your brief or from where you're coming from, you still have the same confidence as the one who actually built out those guidelines and gave those initial like assets for like, I don't know, examples or what to do or how not to do things. Yeah.
So can I just ask a question around like the difference between an online tool like that versus, like an online storage platform like, Dropbox or Google Drive or just like a basic one like that? What's the difference between those sorts of tools?
I would say that the biggest difference is that ecosystem feeling and ecosystem in general, right? So even with the classic scenario, right? PDF plus Dropbox or PDF plus Google Drive, right? We all know those scenarios. And as you switch between those and as you try to find them, it gets troublesome real quickly. And we know very well what it means, right? So with really the kind of a dedicated and almost like a specialty kind of a place for that is where those both things can actually be linked and everything is in context. So if you see an example of how social media should be created, you actually have guidance next to it, which explains the asset or the guidelines in general, right? So everything stays in one place. You actually don't have to switch between environments, which usually is just bad in general from like user experience perspective.
So the benefit there, just reading through the lines, is the creative ecosystem and that you can navigate more easily. It's more user friendly.
Yeah, it's almost like, you would want to make a cup of tea, right? So, and you have to actually go into the store and buy the ingredients because you have nothing at home, right? So you would go to one store, you would buy a tea, you would go 500 meters, go to the next store, buy a sugar, etc., etc. And And when you come back to the home, you no longer want the tea because you spent way too much time just walking around.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And then what people do is, let's take that in a real world example, like in terms of like, say you're in a sales team, you've got to create a pitch, you've got to do this at pace. You've pitches this afternoon, it's the morning, then it's like, well, which pitch do I use? You go to one place, you can't find it, or it's half baked, and then there's some assets missing. You need to put some, value propositions in, and you go somewhere else, and then you've got to, the logos on this product are not quite right. Where do I go? So as you say, and I just haven't got time, so I'm just going to create my own thing, and then that's what happens. And salespeople, I find, often have there's the company decks, and then they have their own versions of them that they've developed. Because they know that they work, and that becomes really tricky to manage over time, because as time goes on, everything gets decentralized and really splintered, and then and that's just one tiny example. If you've got that going across regions, different teams in different scenarios, you're soon out of control real quick. So you've got to have a centralized place where there's truth and where good lives. And if you don't, that's a massive challenge. I was going to ask though, do you, in terms of performance, right? And do you, I don't know if have any stats on brands that manage their assets in a centralized way versus those that don't. I don't have any stats, but I just know that all the top global brands do. And one brand that comes to my mind is like HSBC. Wherever you go in the world, you come off a plane, usually HSBC is sponsoring the tunnel, and you'll see a consistent application. And when you go into their banks and you see all of their social media, wherever you are in the world, very, very well put together, and usually very, on brand, on point, wherever you are. I don't have the stats of the performance. I just know that it just builds trust for me personally as a consumer. Have you got any thoughts, any stats, anything around that you can share, Raitiss?
We haven't done our own research regarding like the efficiency or like how many decreased hours designers spend on creating assets or brand management itself, because I feel like it's such a tricky thing to actually measure, because it comes down to this, not only the brand itself, but also the size of the brand. For a mom and pop shop in New York City is going to be a totally different ballgame than it's going to be with global brands, right? We just recently had a webinar where my colleague Laura actually just went in with some general stats about the brand management. And she mentioned that more than a half of like brand stakeholders actually end up wasting time on just simple asset searching and just trying to find those relevant assets that they need, right? We should definitely do a research. That's one of the things that I really, really want to do. But something that I love more than stats is actually what people say, right? So whenever brand reaches out to us and say, hey, we just launched our brand, everybody loves that. And after 6 months, they send over an email saying, hey, I'm sending over those version 7.1.2 versions. I'm spending way less time in an email. That's what really drives me. Just having those emails from those people saying, hey, I'm spending less time on operation stuff and I'm doing more on creative side of things. And that's what really matters for the brands, I think.
Yeah, I think a few things we haven't talked about is the fact that these online versions are like interactive, right? And they're easily accessible. You can update them in real time. And that's kind of like some of the extra benefits of these online tools.
Yeah, and that also drives like an engagement for the brand, right? So again, if you take a look at just simple comparison about like when you receive a PDF brand guidelines, usually your first thought is, not again, I have to read through the whole thing. I have to try to memorize it. And it's essentially a rule book. Like I have to read a bunch of text. I have some stock imagery there, right? And I have to get through it. It's almost like I have to put it in the calendar to get through it, try to memorize, give my notes, highlight key pages that I actually will end up using, right? But with online brand guidelines, it's a different story, because you actually build not so much of a rule book, but you actually build out an experience. And you have those multimedia, you have those attachments, audio, Spotify integrations, whatever you can imagine, really, right? So if you are like new, hip, cool brand, and you want to focus on like, I don't know, like audio identity more than actual visual identity, you can do that. And you can, everything stays in one place, right? And what happens when we switch that mindset from like, this is a rules that we have to adhere to more of a like, hey, this is the experience we want to give our stakeholders, is that actually people want to spend time in that hub of truth for the brand, right? So they want to be there. And when they see that they actually don't have to read so much as they have to actually experience it, people want to come back. People want to see the newest update. What are they going to create now, right? This was still image before, like now it's animation. What the hell, right? So people want to see people want to, it comes down to like to us as a people in general. We want to have fun, right? And brand guidelines can be fun, although it also has like practical meaning.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Raitis. And particularly if you think about the types of people that tend to use, and we need to use brand identity guidelines well, they tend to be visual people. They tend to be creative people themselves, right? And if you go like, hi, Mr. Creative, here's a 300 page PDF that you need to understand, and all your team, by the way, because you're an agency coming to work with us. And if they don't, then, we're going to be really upset with you. It's like, it doesn't happen in real life in my experience, and I've worked in design teams where this happens. I completely agree. You skim through it, you find the bits that you want to work with, and then you do that. And then there's always stuff around the edges. You just think, oh, well, it'll be fine. And that is the problem, because everybody likes to put their own flair on it and so on. So I agree. Hey, I've got a question for you, a bit of a curveball question, right? How do you see AI developing in this space? Because, for example, I'm working with a brand right now where and I don't do all the design stuff. I'm more consulting from a strategic perspective. We've carved out a brand positioning. We know what's going to make them different in reality, and then how it looks is what's coming now. And so we're working with the creative teams and on that. And one of the things that we've been thinking about is, as we build this out, like, we can potentially use AI to generate standardized assets within particular rules that we put into place. So in other words, the logo is going to always appear top left. We're always going to use these colors. We're always going to use this font. We're always going to use this type of image. And the vision that they've got is that they will have some form of system where a marketing manager, for example, in India, can go on and say, I need this type of asset to advertise this type of event. And the AI will spit out on brand 3 or 4 potential options for them for small sort of campaigns that they're running. Now, I could see that developing as time goes on into amazing campaigns, not just little static kind of graphics. But like, that's where I think this is going. And I know all the designers, and Jacob's like sweating a little bit now, just thinking, what the heck? But like, that's where I see some of this going. And that's the reality. How do you see it developing, Raitiss?
I love that idea that AI could just generate a bunch of assets that we can use in like matter of seconds, right? How I feel about AI is pretty tricky one. I actually just last year, I think I gave a chat about like the future of AI in the branding space, right? And what I talked about is that I feel like the AI is actually, if we're talking about brand and brand guidelines in general and the brand management, then the AI is actually going to be almost like your brand guardian. So it will not allow you to deviate, to be off brand, right? And our Corebook AI R&D department already has created an integration with like OpenAI, where you can create your own GPT that takes the whole information from your brand guidelines. It learns in real time what it says, what are the rules, and instead of generating like new assets, it actually helps you to be on brand. So for example, you just ask it, hey, I'm new employee, I'm new designer. What are the key things that I need to know from my brand guidelines? And it will spit it out like highlights. Or, hey, I have created this asset. Is there any faults or errors like to be on brand? And it will say, hey, yeah, your typography is one way too big. or hey, logo is positioned in like top right corner, but it usually is on bottom left corner, for example, right? So it essentially will be almost kind of a guide helping you out to be on brand. I think like generative AI in general is totally different ballgame, right? And it can create really nice concept arts, and before designer actually goes in and fine tunes it to actual usable asset. But I feel like, at least from our perspective, we feel like it's just more about having information quicker, easier to access, and coming back to that thing that you mentioned about like 200, 300 pages, brand guidelines, skimming through it, right? Perhaps you don't even have to do that. You just ask that super nice AI that the brand has, hey, what are the key things I should know before I do anything with like in my position? And it will just say, hey, nice to meet you. How about you just go ahead and start with like the brand fundamentals, and just helping you a little bit more. But I feel like the AI is evolving so quickly that predicting what it's going to be and what role it will play, I feel like it's almost mission impossible. And if somebody says that they know what's going to happen in the future and what role it will play, they're just trying to catch some likes and shares on social media.
And on that basis, I'm going to ask Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to comment, like you said, I was sweating, but I'm actually on the other side, I'm actually using it already. So especially Gen AI. So uploading a particular style. So for my summit that I'm organizing at the moment, I needed icons for the website. I created 1 or 2 icons in a style, uploaded that style, and then typed in new icons. So I wanted it to generate a new icon of, let's say, a microphone. You type in microphone, and it'll literally copy the style that you've uploaded and create the icon, export it as SVG, and then you have an icon file, which saves you hours of time. So yeah, I see it as a tool, and I'm already using it like pretty much every day. And yeah, I'm excited for where it's going, especially the video side of things, which is going rapidly. And it's just in 1 year, it's improved so much. So I look forward to that.
Sometimes I wonder if you are actually not an AI yourself, Jacob, but just putting it out there.
I am a custom GPT or agent.
Maybe he is. This is the question we all need to, ask ourselves. Just talking about video though, and just going back to, some other experiences that I've had. I think when you're one of the things that I find businesses struggle with, like they usually have a centralized brand team, right? And this team are in charge of consistency, and they're usually in a company, in a big company anyway. But it's very hard for that team because they're often seen as the bottleneck. So the marketing teams are trying to get stuff out. They've got to get it approved by the brand team. The brand team then, if they're not happy, say we need to change that. A lot of tension involved. And particularly if the marketing teams are working with agencies. So one of because then they've got to go back to the agency and then explain the brand team are not happy, and it's very inefficient. So one of the things that I often look at is, well, how do we onboard anybody that's going to touch the brand into the brand's world? And if we can do that, as you said, Raitiss, swiftly, maybe with video and audio, like we can do that, we can get them up to speed quicker, get them excited about working with the brand, and get them to understand the core principles. And from my perspective as a strategist, understand the strategy and the core positioning. So one of the things I always try and do is make sure, when I'm advising clients, that we get a video on onboarding people into the essence of the brand. Do you see a need for that? And, do you see in, for example, your software, do you allow those sort of videos to go in, those training and onboarding videos that are explainers? And do you feel that a lot of your customers use that?
I'm all over like tutorial videos or just simple explanations of what people should actually go ahead and pay attention to. We do a lot of that. Not a lot of brands actually go ahead and do that. I'm not sure why.
Why would not? I see this as well. People don't do it as much as they should.
Yeah, because, for example, just coming back to like AI question, right? It most probably is way easier to explain how to prompt and what to look out for in a video than to simply just type in a bunch of text saying, hey, this is the prompts, do that, don't do that. But in a video, just explain, hey, if you do this, it's going to create this, but if you change this one small word to set of on brand prompts, it will spit out this kind of results, right? And in that way, it's way more visual, and people actually learn just a tiny little bit more from the videos than from text itself, right? So, and it's also a little bit more fun to actually see the other person explain and actually perhaps even show in real time how that impacts their workflow or anything of that.
Yeah, that's cool. It's funny, you should, just going back to the AI again, I was just thinking about something that happened to me the other day. So I'm working with a brand, and they asked me to look at some core messaging, and we'd had another sort of tone of voice expert build out tone of voice. Now, I understood the brand's key value propositions and the type of message, but I'm not at heart a copywriter. But the copywriter was unavailable, and we needed to get this done fairly swiftly. So what I did was I went into AI and I told it all the principles of the brand tone of voice. And I said, this is what the value propositions that I've written. I'd like you to rewrite these in the right tone of voice. And, it wasn't perfect. We had to tweak some stuff, but it was pretty good. And it gave me lots of options. So I as time develops, I'd be interested to, if in the brand management systems, like you were saying, there might be chatbots you can ask about it, but you might actually then evolve that into generating at least concepts that are on brand that then can be tweaked and change. And for me, I think there's so much opportunity with these systems that you're involved in building, like for all of that. They're going to be an essential requirement, I think, for businesses that take brands seriously going forwards. Any ideas, any thoughts that sparked?
Yeah, definitely. I think in concept, it's actually amazing what we can do with that, right? And just take an example of yours, right? But then we have to take a step back. So what are actually brand tone of voice or brand assets or the guidelines in general? It's actually very, very sensitive information that it has been crafted meticulously, like over the years, depending on the brand. And then there is this huge question, what happens with our information when we put it in AI, right? Who learns from it? Where the data is stored. Of course, that's European in me speaking with all the data protection and GDPRs. But there's this huge question, right? And I feel like brands are a little bit afraid, right? They don't know if their brand assets are going to be used for training purposes. How can they perhaps leverage AI in a safe way that actually doesn't compromise that information, right? When we get through all of those questions and we actually establish this kind of a flow, right? Just as we had with simple internet. When the internet came out, nobody was like, what the hell? What happens when I type in something there? What happens when I put information there? Who owns it? What happens? When we get through that stage of for AI, I feel like it's going to be just incredible tool that will help not only brands, but I think just globally for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the future, where it could go. We've talked about why it could be useful right now. Let's just talk about how. Say I'm a company and I think, okay, this makes sense. I'm going to put my assets online, going to make sure that everybody right now and then into the future is going to use them in a consistent way. As time goes on, I can update them and make sure that that's pushed out to everybody correctly. I see the value in that. So imagine I've been used to working, though, in the old school way. We talked about PDF and Dropbox or something. How do you recommend that people start to begin to move more into this kind of centralized brand management system?
I think just taking it step by step. Whenever we think about legacy formats, it usually means that when we start to work on it, to share it, we actually have to be finished with it. So if we start to build it out, we have to make all the things happen, and then we can share it with the rest of the team. With online brand guidelines and kind of this solution in general, the cool thing is that you actually don't have to finish anything at any point, and you can start to share it with the team. So let's say that you have 200 pages in your brand guidelines at the moment, when you're like, just me taking that information and transforming into online environment is going to take ages. Like, I'm not going to do that. That's for sure. So you don't actually have to do that. Start with brand fundamentals. Put up logo, typography, tone of voice, perhaps some basic assets, right? And start to build it out page by page. All the while, sharing with the rest of the team, so they can already start to benefit from that. So it's like living and breathing documents, right? So you don't have to be actually finished as you had before this kind of a format even was available. So yeah, I think just taking it step by step, just start build it out little by little, perhaps transform already existing brand guidelines, and then eventually in no time you're going to get to the finished product. Well, brand guidelines can be finished.
And how do you get the team on board and like up to speed with how to use the tool and so forth?
That really depends on the tool itself, right? I can only speak about Corebook in general. We, since day zero, have always put ease of use and really kind of a simple to understand UX UI as core principle for Corebook. So I would say that if you have ever used a web builder, there are a bunch of them, right? You will feel pretty quickly at home. Of course, with our like flair and finesse and all that, but you will feel really, really quickly at home, and you'll really start to do advanced stuff real quickly. And I feel like on average, if you spend about, I don't know, full working day, you can create a lot of things on Corebook real quickly.
Okay. And you're just sharing a link or a login to the portal, and then people learn how to use it, the tool, once they're there.
Yeah. So just for example, like one of our clients, Miro, they have set up like brandkit.miro.com. It's publicly available. If anyone is listening, go ahead and check it out, see what Miro's up to. But yeah, everybody can go in, see what's what, right? And learn from it. And of course, with online environment, there's also this huge additional benefit that actually you can hide information behind like a password, or you can hide it from everybody except editors. So for the first time, brands actually have full control over like access, security, and the sharing capabilities. As with the legacy, well, we know what happens when we send something out. It goes to live their own life. We don't know where it will end up, and that's why we have so many like branding leaks at the end of the day, because somebody shares an MVP or in production version of the brand, and it ends up on some website just says, hey, these guys are working on this amazing stuff, check it out. But with online environment, it's not even possible, especially if you're utilizing something like single sign-on authorization, where anybody who wants to visit those brand guides actually have to have a work email. Only that way they can log in. So you can make sure that only approved people essentially can get access to the brand guidelines. So I feel that's like so much overlooked feature of online environment. It just buys you not only that environment, but actually buys you that safety feeling, and making sure that, well, essentially you have that peace of mind when you're working with brand, and especially when you're working on a rebrand or pretty big refresh, or you're an agency actually working with the biggest client you ever had, and you're like, we can't tell anyone about this. Like we have NDAs, inside an NDA, which holds another NDA, right? We can't mention any of this stuff, even to like 5 kids. And if you're working on a PDF, well, it's pretty hard to control it, especially if you have to collaborate internationally, right? You have to send over things, you have to share that way. I think it really, well, it can create a tension that's not needed, essentially.
That's really interesting, because what you're in effect talking about there, and I hadn't really clocked this until just now, so maybe I'm just a bit slow, is what you're saying is these platforms, they can be used in the development of the brand identity system, as well as when it's finished at the end. And obviously when it's finished, as finished in inverted commas, because as you say, it's always going to evolve and change over time. That's a really interesting thing. And then in the development phase, you can make sure it's all locked down. And then even after that, you can lock off areas of the system if necessary. But one thing I find quite fascinating is there is a rise, isn't there, in brands being super transparent. Like, and you mentioned a brand earlier, was it Miro, about how they're developing their brand. Like there's loads of online, publicly viewable brand identity systems, which people can go and look at and use, particularly international brands, particularly in the sort of the tech SaaS space. I find that there's this kind of openness to developing and being free with like, this is us, this is our typography, this is how we do it. And they need to be like that, particularly if they're scaling at pace, because they need access to that information to be widely available. Do you find that in terms of that transparency, that's a good thing for brands, or do you see a need for brands sometimes to be, I'm not talking about sensitive information, I just mean like just their brand identity system to be more closed on that? What's your sort of take on that, Raitis?
I'm all over publicly available identity systems, especially with those bigger brands. So we can have brand guidelines, we can have that publicly available, we can have it private. But what happens if somebody wants to grab the logo, right? They're going to go to your website, grab a low resolution version of it, try to find which typography you're using and try to mimic some form of asset. So why don't we just provide everything beforehand? So when people want to build out assets that are related to our brand, they actually have access to high resolution resources, right? You still have the information publicly available. That's why I think sometimes brands have this fear. What's going to happen? They're going to have access to logo files, typography, tone of voice, all that. Hello, you have that already publicly available in your website, in your social media. If somebody wants to replicate your identity, they will be able to do that from social media, from your website. They already will be able to do that. But the drawback of that is that they can do that. They're going to do a lesser job on it because they have access to low resolution assets. They don't have access to actual guidelines for that. And that just saves a bunch of time for everybody included, right? Of course, there's conversations to have about sensitive information, like campaigns, all that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about essentially brand fundamentals that are out there already. It's just the question about providing just better way how to access that information.
I saw this little feature when you on a website, I can't remember what website it was, but you right click on the logo and a little pop-up comes saying download style guide or view online style guide. And that's where you can download all the assets. So I thought that was pretty handy.
Not like that, but we have this feature called attachments, where, for example, if you put up a logo file that is just editorial asset at that point, you can actually add attachments to that, and you can upload anything you really want. So if you want to provide EPS, PNGs, perhaps you have animated version of the logo, you can add all of those assets easily available for everybody. All they have to do is just, logo, hover over it, click on it, and grab whatever they need, right? So super quick. And the best part about it is that it's actually on brand. It's actually brand approved assets. It's not like some weird sketchy site that says that they have PNG, but we know what means downloading a PNG from Google, right? So yeah, giving that confidence for everybody included.
Great. So, I mean, I think we've danced around this quite a bit. I'm just wondering, is there anything else that we haven't covered off that you think that we should discuss? Because I think it's quite obvious that this is the future for brand management, and definitely makes an awful lot of sense. Any other areas you think we should discuss before we close up?
I think I just want to leave with the last bit is that usually when brand managers or creative agencies start to work on the brand guidelines, they think about it as a tangible resource, right? They're thinking about it as a practical use case of the brand guidelines. But if we zoom out for a little bit, brand guidelines isn't actually, and afterwards brand management isn't really about the practicality of the brand guidelines or the brand assets. It's actually about just you're actually creating a confidence and reassurance for the brand. So if the brand guidelines have been created beautifully, easily accessible, and every stakeholder knows that they can count on that sort of truth when they work on their own time, in their own time zone, right? it gives that confidence to actually move forward a lot quicker, but faster. And what happens is when you don't have that confidence is something that I mentioned at the beginning of the call, right? People start to scale down, they slow down, they start to question, and a lot of those things can actually just distract collaboration instead of actually improving it. Especially nowadays when, well, not only remote first, but global teams that are just interconnected as essentially a norm, right? It's not out of ordinary that someone from the New York City is collaborating with someone from Sydney, for example, right? So just making sure that doesn't matter when, how, if you're working on the brand, you have that full confidence. So yeah, I feel like that's what I would love to leave with that. Yeah.
I think that's a great ending part. And I think even beyond that, if I push it further, like why do we want to give people confidence that what they're working with is right? And why does the brand need to manage it? Like we were saying at the start, it's really because what the brand is trying to do is manage its positioning in the market. It's wanting to make sure that people recognize its touch points, recognize its messaging, and it wants to build up that equity in the share of its audience's mind. And if you're not doing that, then you're opening yourself up to all sorts of confusion and lack of confidence from a consumer's perspective, which are ultimately is the core thing, right? So I think you're right, internal confidence and with the partners and the agencies and the stakeholders that are working with the brand, but also let's push it like right back down to consumer confidence that you are who you say you are, that the brand is fulfilling this amazing promise, and that you're reliable to buy from. And I think ultimately that's got to be front of mind as we close up. Any final thoughts, Jacob?
Well, you said that's the core thing, and it just made me think of Corebook. So you kind of came full circle there.
There we go. Talking of Corebook, how do people can they get a demo? Can they explore that? Like, where do people go to find out a little bit more about Corebook and also find out more about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So all you have to do is just Google Corebook, and we should be the #1 hit. Also happen to be on online brand guidelines, so you can also just search for that. But for direct link, just go to corebook.io. You can give it a shot. We have 2 weeks free trial where you can actually see how it fits into your workflow and tech stack. And you can also, of course, book a call with our amazing product team, right? And for you guys that are listening, if you book a call and you mention the reference as a source where you're coming from, this podcast, I will personally take over that call with you and we have a conversation with you.
Nice. There you go. Careful what you promise, Raitiss, because our listenership is growing to the thousands. So good luck. Got beyond the thousands. I think we're at. I think we're somewhere. I don't even look at it anymore. But yeah, so be careful. So keep writers busy, everybody, and make sure you do that. Brilliant. And as I say, this episode isn't sponsored at all. So there are other other platforms. Feel free to explore them. But Corebook is an awesome platform. So definitely check that out. Right. I guess we'll end there. Raitiss, thanks so much for coming on. It's been amazing to have you and your personality. Love to talk Star Wars with you and share more terrible Star Wars jokes later on. From Jacob and I and all our listeners, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It has been incredible. Lovely to chat with you. And guys, let's stay confident in our branding. And Corebook is one of the platforms, but there are a bunch of platforms out there that can fit into your needs. Doesn't matter the size of your company on brand. So just choose whatever fits for you. And let's just make sure that PDFs are a thing of our past. I think that's what matters the most.
Oh, yeah. See you then. Thank you.